Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
I've always said a farm is mostly made of weather and stubbornness. The weather you take. The stubbornness you make. My name is Owen Miller, 50 years old by the calendar and older by the knees. I farm a stretch of ground that's more rocks than postcards, soybeans in the flatter parts, corn words for giving, a garden out back that thinks tomatoes are a moral question. The land was my father's and his father's before him. We measure seasons and chores, not holidays, and the only calendar that matters is the one the sky keeps. For most of my life, I thought I'd figured out the quiet kind of happy. My wife, Laura, and I built it that way. We didn't take fancy trips or wear clothes that announced themselves. We had coffee at dawn and supper when the sun remembered to go down. I fixed fences, she kept books that could pass an audit. On Saturdays we drove into town, bought feed, argued gently about peaches, and came home with a pie the dog wasn't allowed to look at. It wasn't exciting. It was ours. You can feel a shift in a house the way you can feel a shift in the wind. It doesn't announce itself, it just keeps being there. Laura started going to the city more, the city meaning the county seat one way and the bigger city 2 counties over the other way, depending on her mood. Opportunities, she said, last spring, like the word had a bell in it. There are bigger possibilities out there than us fussing over rows. I'm fond of fussing over rows, I said. She smiled like I was being adorable and old. That's because you've never seen what land can really do. There's development up by the highway, Owen. Prices are changing. We should think like people who aren't stuck in the past. I chewed on that a while. I don't mind not being current if the roof doesn't leak. But what she meant started showing up in comments that didn't sound like her. We sit on this place like it's a museum, she'd say, flipping a magazine that had no dirt on it. Other folks are making moves. What sort of moves? I asked. The kind that give you a future, she said, which stung more than I let on. I thought we had one. Then came the day our neighbor Chuck drove his four-wheeler right up to the porch like he was delivering a sermon. Chuck is a man who has seen a lot of crops and a lot of nonsense and can't resist commentary on both. He took off his cap and said, "Owen, I'm gonna say a thing I wish I didn't have to say." "Those are rarely my favorite things," I said. "Go on." "I seen Laura in town," he said. "A couple times lately. Not the feed store. Not the quilt show. With that real estate fella, Dunham. Tall one with the tie that looks like it's choking him. They were thick as thieves outside the courthouse and then again outside the bank. I'm not saying anything, except what I saw." I laughed, because defense can look like humor. "She's always liked paperwork," I said. "Maybe she's adopting a subdivision." Chuck didn't laugh. "I figure you'd want to know," he said, and put his cap back on like a gentleman who did his duty. "You call me if you need anything that involves lifting or swearing." I stood on the porch a long time after he left, watching the wind make decisions in the hay. I told myself it was nothing. People meet with agents for a lot of reasons. Taxes. Appraisals. Estate planning. All sorts of grown-up words. Then I walked inside and opened the desk drawer where we keep our grown-up words and found different ones. The folder was labeled Opportunities, which felt like a joke I wasn't in on. Inside were papers I hadn't seen, letters of intent with our parcel number, emails printed out with cheerful fonts, an appraisal request I hadn't authorized. The kicker was a draft contract with a developer I'd heard of and never wanted to meet, offering a number that could pay off every debt we'd ever had and a few we hadn't gotten around to. There was a signature line with my name typed neat like I was all ready to agree. I heard the screen door and closed the drawer because my hands did that on their own. Laura came in trailing a smell that wasn't our house, city-scented, some kind of lemon that thought it was better than trees. She kissed the air next to my cheek. "You look like you swallowed a stone," she said. "Everything okay?" "You've been spending time with Dunham," I said, trying to make it a sentence without a question mark. She shrugged the way you shrug off rain. "He's a professional. We're exploring options. Like I told you." "Options that include a contract with my name on them?" I said. Her eyes flickered. "Just a second," but I saw it. "Don't be dramatic, Owen." "I'm trying to be precise," I said. "Are you trying to sell our land?" She put her purse down like it weighed more than it did. "Listen to me," she said, and the tone was new. It had authority borrowed from somebody else's office. "You work yourself into the ground for what? For the right to be broke in nicer overalls? There are buyers who see potential here. Real money. We could move into a place with central air that doesn't croak. We could go places where the dirt is not in your boots all day. You could fish instead of fight tractors." "I don't want to fish," I said. "I want to farm." She grimaced like I'd said I wanted to eat nails. That's exactly the problem. I was quiet, because shouting doesn't fix a roof and it doesn't fix a marriage. She took my quiet for consent and said the sentence that turned the day mean. "I'll sell whether you sign or not," she said, soft, like a lullaby. "I've already started the process. You won't stop it. You don't stop much. This is happening. You won't ever make this land into what it could be. I will." "You can't sell what's mine to keep," I said, and it came out a whisper with a spine. She looked at me the way city people look at a tractor on a two-lane. "Watch me," she said, and went to run the faucet like it had done something wrong. I didn't tell Chuck the details. I didn't tell anyone. I did what men like me do when the earth under us shakes. I went to the old barn. It leans like it's listening. It has a smell that is more home than the house, if I'm honest, hay and oil and the ghosts of every animal that gave us milk or trouble. I sat on an upturned bucket like a man punishing himself and stared at the dust in the sunlight until it looked like weather. The barn has held my worst and best. It took this, too. I felt small, like a boy who couldn't lift a bale. I felt old, like a field that's been planted too often. Mostly I felt tired in a way that sleep doesn't cure. There was a hammer on the workbench and I thought about how many problems I'd solved with it that had nothing to do with wood. Fix the latch. Fix the hinge. Fix the gate. The hammer sat there heavy and honest, and I remembered my father saying, "A tool is only as dumb as the hand holding it." I'm not dumb, I thought. I'm just hurt. What woke up in me wasn't a roar. More like a clearing of the throat. An old part of me stood up from a chair and said, "Enough." The sentence that followed surprised me with how much it sounded like a prayer. "This land is my blood." My father didn't give me speeches. He gave me deeds on paper and deeds you could see from the road. He taught me where the property line runs by pointing at the oak that got struck in '89 and the fence post that's not straight but always has been. He taught me that a signature is a sown field, you don't put your name where you don't mean to harvest. If Laura was really trying to sell, she needed my name or something that looked enough like it. She'd never forge, I told myself. Then I remembered the drawer. Then I stopped letting myself be the kind of person whose mercy writes other people's checks. The county keeps ours like a cow, regular, unless it isn't. I drove in on a Tuesday that felt like a Thursday and asked the clerk if I could see any filings with our parcel number. The clerk knows my family, she's been to potlucks where my aunt feeds men twice their size. She brought me a stack of things that made my stomach choose flight. There it was, a recorded memorandum of contract, referencing an agreement for sale, with the notary seal I recognized from a guy who stands at ribbon cuttings a lot for a man who has never used scissors. There was a deed of trust drafted, not recorded, naming a shell name I recognized from developers who prefer anonymity to gratitude. There was a power of attorney, limited, it claimed, with my name on a line that didn't look like I'd ever been near it. I felt heat in my face like July. I took pictures. I asked for copies. I paid for them like a citizen because righteousness isn't an excuse not to follow rules. Back home, I spread the papers out on the kitchen table where we'd eaten 1,000 quiet dinners, and I looked at the signatures until they stopped looking like letters and started looking like evidence. My signature is a particular mess, I know that loses interest, an M that tries to be fancy and then apologizes. The O on this paper had enthusiasm I don't have. The M looked like someone practicing. The date was wrong in a way the date gets wrong when you backfill. There were emails printed, too, in that folder, a thread between Laura and the agent, with the notary copied, discussing how to get this past him and what if he balks, and once we have the seal, it's done. She'd used my full name in a context that made it feel like a stranger. She'd said I'll handle Owen. It shouldn't have been a new sentence. It landed like one. I made more copies than a sane person. I put them in a binder because the courtroom in my head had particular preferences. Then I drove to town for the second time that week and parked in a spot I never park in because it felt like I was already someone else. The county judge is a woman who taught my cousin to read when he was 11 and stubborn about it. She sits with her shoulders back like her chair is counting on her. Her clerk told me she had 5 minutes if I could fit my trouble into them. I took 3. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm not asking you to convict my wife in your hallway. I'm asking for 2 pieces of advice. 1. Who do I take forged documents to? 2. Is there a way to keep a bad sale from fleeing the barn while we argue about it?" She listened the way an old tree listens to wind. Then she told me what to do like she'd been waiting for me to ask. "You take that to the sheriff's investigator and the county attorney," she said. "Say the words suspected forgery and fraud. Don't say more than you can prove. As for the land, file a lease pendens with the clerk and a petition for temporary restraining order to prevent transfer pending verification. The law likes tidy. Make it tidy." She glanced at the pages. "And, Mr. Miller? Don't talk about this at the feed store. Talk about it on paper." "Yes, ma'am," I said, and felt 12 in the useful way. I went to the sheriff. Then the county attorney. They both had faces that say I have seen 100 divorces and 100 lies, let's find the truth in these. The investigator asked for the originals. I gave him copies and told him where the originals were, like a man putting out a map to a field where he buried his pride. The county attorney, a compact woman who carries a calm like a well, asked if I'd be comfortable signing an affidavit. Comfortable is generous. I did it anyway. I wrote what I knew. I left out what I didn't. I swore. The word felt heavier than usual. Then I went home and waited the way you wait for rain. Looking at the sky doesn't make it faster. Laura came back that evening with the city still on her clothes. She saw the table and the binder and my face and understood that something had shifted. "You've been busy," she said. "I had to," I said. "You skipped telling me the plan." She crossed her arms, which used to feel like home and now looked like strategy. "You can't stop it," Dunham said. "Dunham is not the law," I said. "And neither are you. We'll let paperwork decide." Her mouth made a thin line. "The notary will cover this," she said. "That's literally his job." "His job," I said, "isn't to cover crimes. It's to watch people sign. He didn't watch me sign anything." "You don't know how this works," she said, voice in that register people use when they want to be done with you. "You never have." "I know how land works," I said, not loud, just steady. "It doesn't belong to whoever wants it most. It belongs to whoever keeps it honest." She laughed once, sharp. "You and your salt of the earth routine. You're going to lose." "I've been losing slowly for a while," I said. "This is me stopping." 2 days later, Dunham himself drove up my drive in a truck that wished it were a different truck. He got out with his tie and his smile and his lack of mud. "Mr. Miller," he said, offering a hand that didn't look like it had ever fixed anything. "Let's be reasonable." "I get reasonable done by noon most days," I said, not taking his hand. "Afternoons are for stubborn." "We've got a deal in motion," he said. "You're the only wobble. Sign the thing. You'll thank me in a year when you're on a beach." "I get sunburned," I said. And I filed to cloud the title. "Nothing's moving." He blinked like I'd spoken a language he'd hoped I didn't know. "You filed a lease pendens?" he asked, as if I'd admitted to reading in public. "I did," I said. "And I talked to the county. And the sheriff. I'm sure they'll be visiting your notary, seeing as how he notarized a ghost." Dunham's tie seemed to tighten itself. "You're making this confrontational," he said. "We could have done this clean." "We still can," I said. "You go away." He left in a hurry that made Dust complain. The next day, the notary, same guy from half the ribbon cuttings in 3 towns, called me as if we were friends. "Mr. Miller," he said, smooth, "there's been a misunderstanding. I must have stamped something prematurely. Happens when you're busy. If you'll just stop down, we can fix it." "I'll be stopping by with the sheriff," I said. "That'll fix it quicker." Silence. Then, "No need for." "There's need," I said, and hung up because sometimes the only way to be brave is to pretend you're already done. What happens next in stories like this rarely happens quick. Real life prefers a slow simmer. But the county attorney must have had room on her stove, because things moved. The investigator came by, asked me to show him the drawer, took the originals with a chain of custody envelope like a TV show that respects itself. The judge signed the restraining order pending review. The clerk recorded the lease pendants with a thump that sounded like a handshake. I slept for the first time in 10 nights. When the charge came, forgery and attempted fraud, formal as Sunday clothes, I didn't feel triumph. I felt clean. Laura was served, and some part of me that still wanted to make her coffee in the morning cracked and sat down. She called me names she'd never called me before, which had less sting than I'd imagined because it sounded like someone else's mouth. She told me I was petty and small and clinging to dirt. I told her dirt is literally what feeds us. We were not speaking the same language anymore. The notary pleaded to save his stamp. The agent disappeared into an office that had a door the county liked. The developer sent a lawyer who wrote letters that tried to sound like thunder. The county answered with rain. The deal, the big opportunity, was annulled, legally, officially, permanently, a word I didn't think I'd hear with relief. The judge's order said what I knew in my bones: signatures mean things, seals mean things, and you don't get to take a man's acreage by pretending his hand was there when it wasn't. The morning the ruling came down, I walked the fence line like a man who'd just met his own name again. The south pasture ward you like it was proud. The oak by the corner looked less tired. I know that's not science. It's something better. It's what happens when your blood sits back down where it belongs. Laura moved out quietly, which was a kindness I didn't earn and didn't refuse. We divided plates and chairs like adults, except for the one fight about the good skillet where I showed my worst self and then apologized because a man should not be buried with a skillet and I was acting like I wanted to be. She took her dresses and her lemon smells and the folder marked opportunities, which I let her have because it had nothing left that could hurt me. She said, at the door, "You'll never change." I said, "That's why this land is still here." It wasn't a victory line. It was a fact that felt like a blanket. I told Chuck because you can't keep a thing like that from a man who can see your porch from his. He nodded the way men nod when they approve of a fence post. "Knew you had gristle," he said. "What now?" "Now I farm," I said. "Harder." The best part of this story is small and personal and would make no sense to anyone who thinks happiness comes from a view of the ocean. The family that owns the 40 acres next to me, the Carsons, had been talking about selling for years, not out of greed, just out of tired. Their kids went to the city and discovered salaries that don't weather. After the dust settled in my house, Mr. Carson cornered me at church, right after the hymn where folks pretend they know the third verse, and said, "You want to keep this community from turning into a cul-de-sac, Owen?" "I do," I said. "Then buy my land," he said, like he was offering me a second chance at an old joke. "I'll give you a neighbor's price. I'd rather see you plant than see vinyl siding." We signed papers that had all the right signatures and all the right eyes on them. I wrote the biggest check my hand has ever written. I walked that new ground that afternoon and learned its lumps. There's a low spot that will always be a low spot in a patch by the hedgerow where the soil is black like chocolate cake. I stood in that patch and talked to my father out loud, because life is short and the dead don't mind if you sound foolish. "We did it," I said. "We kept the line." The sign was Laura's idea, years ago. "We should get a proper sign," she'd said, back when we were still on the same team. I didn't bother then because the mailbox had our name and the land didn't need reminding. After all this, I went to the little shop on Main where the owner can paint a truck on a beer bottle and make it look like a portrait, and I asked her to make me a sign that said what I needed to say out loud. At the top, Miller Farm. Under that, in a straight, stubborn font that looks like a handshake, Honest Soil. Folks ask why that phrase. I tell them because it's the whole sermon. The soil tells the truth, every season. It will not give you what you didn't put in. It will not lie about your shortcuts. It keeps your secrets if your secrets are seeds. It exposes your lies if your lies are laziness. Honest soil doesn't mean perfect. It means what it says it is. We put the sign up on a Saturday when the town didn't need us anywhere else. Chuck held the post level and commented on all the ways we could be doing it better. I poured the concrete like I pour coffee, slow and wishing I'd made more. A couple of kids from the 4-H club came by with a camera because small towns will make content out of anything. One of them asked me if I was going to start a YouTube channel about farming. I told him the two kinds of people who should never have a channel are surgeons during surgery and farmers during planting. The first season after the mess, the rain cooperated just enough to keep me humble. I planted straight enough that planes had nothing to add. I worked harder than I'd worked in 10 years and slept like I was borrowing a bed from myself. I hired a high school kid part-time who reminded me that strength is a renewable resource as long as it comes with a pizza now and then. I called the county attorney's office once, just once, to say thank you, and the woman who answered said people don't often do that, and I said maybe they should. Sometimes at night, the barn is a confessional again. I sit on that same bucket, and the dust in the sunlight is gone because it's dark, and I think about the shape of things. I think about Laura in the city, maybe looking at land on a screen instead of from a fence line. I don't hate her. I'm not noble, I'm just done. I hope she finds a future that feels like a future to her. I hope Dunham finds a new tie. I hope the notary stamps his groceries. I watch this happen and remembers why the word means what it means. When people ask if I'd do anything different, I tell them I'd have paid more attention to my own house sooner. Not because I could have stopped everything, some rivers run where they want, but because looking the other way is a chore that wears you down in places you need strong. I tell them I learned that love without respect is a Craigslist advertisement, and land without law is a rumor. I tell them paper matters. Not because paper makes a thing true, but because truth likes company. There's a picture on my fridge now, a Polaroid a kid took at the sign raising. I'm standing with one hand on the post like I'm holding up the sky. Chuck is in the background making a face that indicates an opinion about level versus plumb. The sign is a little crooked if you stare. I like it that way. Crooked things stand longer around here. They flex with the weather. They tell you the wind's direction without spinning. On Sunday afternoons, when the chores are done enough to pretend you're a human being, I sit on the tailgate with a mason jar of tea and watch the line between my old acres and my new ones. The grass doesn't know there's a line. The birds don't. The sky doesn't. Lines are for people, to remind us where our promises are supposed to be kept. A truck will slow sometimes out by the road, folks reading the sign. Some will honk. Some will nod. One time a fellow from the city stopped and asked if Honest Soil was a brand. I told him it was an explanation. He said that was good branding anyway. Maybe it is. I'm not selling it. The other night, lightning was teasing the horizon, and the smell that comes before rain walked across the field like someone you love returning from a long errand. I thought of my father again. And his father, and whatever boy or girl in this family comes next will have to decide between tractor seats and office chairs. I'll leave them a farm with room for their choice. That's the job. What happened to Laura? Folks ask in low voices, which is how gossip dresses up as concern. She pled to something the judge could live with and the county could put on a shelf labeled lesson taught. We divorce like adults who failed, which is to say expensively and with a minimum of souvenirs. She sent a letter once, saying she thought I'd be happy or angry. I sent a letter back that said I was too busy for anger. It takes a lot of fuel, and I need mine for tractors. I keep a small notebook in my shirt pocket, like my father did. He wrote numbers in his. I write truths I don't want to forget. The first entry after all this reads, "Don't let anybody tell you what your land is for if they've never bled on it." The second, "Paperwork is a plow, run straight when you guide it." The third is just two words I didn't realize I needed to see in ink until I put them there, still here. I guess that's the story. Simple, which is to say hard. A woman I loved decided our life was too small and tried to sell the only thing I ever learned to love right. I thought I'd lost everything. Then I stood up, held on to the tools I knew, and asked the law to do what the law says it does. It did. I bought more ground to make the herd useful. I put up a sign not to brag but to remember. If you drive by and see a man in a hat that used to be nicer, standing where the field dips toward the creek, that's me. If you roll your window down, you'll smell cut hay and gasoline and maybe rain. If you ask me how things are, I'll tell you the truth we tell each other here: when the corn is behaving and the bottom line is not embarrassing, can't complain. And I won't. There's work to do. The soil is honest. Now it's my turn to be. Thank you for listening my story. If you want more raw, real, and gripping stories like this one, subscribe to the AEN Stories channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.